Okay, so finally we want to go over a few camera techniques and rendering tips here. If I drag my timeline along here, you can see the camera selected in white there following the marble, and you can also see what the camera is seeing down in the camera view here. I've got a couple of things set up on the camera. I actually have two track 2 constraints, which if you select your camera and then you click on this little chain link button, you can add object constraints and select the track 2. And typically the track 2, the settings, you want it to be -Z and Y. So what's actually going on here is I have the camera set up to be tracked to two different objects. One is this ball, and then the other is this big roller ball, which is the big ball later in the animation. So if I come down here to my outliner and type big, and then big roller will pop up and I select that, and then I tap Alt and tap middle mouse, then I'll zoom in on that object here if you're using Sensei format. And so I have the camera set up to first follow the little ball and then later follow the big one. But you need to have control of the influence while you're doing that, because oftentimes you're going to need a little moving around space. So you want to be able to animate the position of your camera at the same time of having it aided with a track 2. So starting out, the influence of the regular ball there is at 100%, and the influence of the big one is at 0, so basically no influence. So my camera's tracking it, tracking it, tracking it. And you'll see right around here, the influence goes down. I want the camera to lag behind while in this kind of little castle tunnel thing, because it looks cool being able to slow down there and then watch the actual marble go out. So you just put your mouse over the influence, tap I to insert a keyframe, and then you can see as we leave the little castle that I have the influence set to go back up, and follow very closely here. And as it's coming down the spirals here, I have it dropping again so I can have more freedom to position my camera where I want to without it being controlled by that track 2 constraint. And so basically I have it come all the way to 0, and they're both at 0 for a while. And this is so I can move the camera both vertically and horizontally with total freedom however I want until I want it to be tracking again. And you'll see right as the ball's coming up here, I increase the influence again and then decrease it while I am going through the spinners here, and then it increases again. And then right as the animation's getting towards the domino part, I have it go completely down because the animation is no longer about the ball. At this point I need to be following the dominoes. So while it's on the dominoes, it's actually just completely free-ranged keyframed. I moved the camera to a position I wanted and inserted a keyframe and just followed these all along with no kind of tracking help at all, up until we get past the crane swing, and then the camera begins to track the big roller. And you can see as it does, the influence moves up there, because at that point in the animation is when I inserted the keyframe to be able to track that. And then so that pretty much rides it on out towards the end, where I then, once the action really isn't about the big roller anymore, the influence goes down again, so I have total freedom to move and animate my camera wherever I want for the breaking glass finale. So you may have noticed, if I click back here to go back to the end and I hold my middle mouse button to drag my animation back to 0 frame here, you may have noticed this little orange thing. If I click on it, you'll see it has several constraints too, the little chain link thing, of copy location. The first one of these, I have the copy location set to the ball. And the point of this is I needed an object for the camera to focus on for use in depth of field. So of course if we click on our camera, we have the depth of field option, which if you then click use nodes will show up when you render. The object I have it following is this little orange cone, which is just an empty, which you can add an empty by double right clicking or tapping Shift A and going to empty and add any one of these. And basically they're just to represent a point in space in Blender. So they're for you to have a reference point. So I needed the camera to be able to follow this, but the problem is the camera couldn't just follow the marble all the way through for the depth of field, because once it reached the dominoes sequence, there would have been nothing for it to reference for a point of the depth of field. So if we click on our object here and I tap Alt and middle mouse button, it zooms me in on it, you can see that the orange depth of field object is passed off from the ball and it starts following the dominoes. If I click on it, and you see its influence is set to 0 on the ball at this point. So I animated its influence to be 100% on the ball all the way until we're no longer following the ball. And then basically I just had to animate it by hand, or set these keyframes for it to follow the position of these dominoes so that I get a proper depth of field effect and I'm not blurring out stuff that's right in front of me. Right here, where I have the camera begins to back away and look at the crane over there, we see that it is increasing in the Miley Cyrus constraint all the way until right about there where it gets 1, and so you see it's now inside of the location of the wrecking ball. So if I tap Z, we see that it's in there. Tap Alt Z, that'll get me back into texture mode. So the influence of the copy location constraint is set to 100 there, so it's fully inside this. So all the depth of field action in the camera is fully on the wrecking ball for when it renders. And then it goes back down to 0 and the influence is sent up all the way to the big roller ball we have there. So it's basically following that, and then it transfers finally to the last little marble, which I call Devil Ball for some reason. It would have, the influence was there, so that way the focus is directly on the marble.